Uh, it gives me great pleasure to launch this 2021 report to the community today. It's the work of so many people. We'll talk more about who all has been involved, but I just want to say thank you for being here. I'm going to just kind of go through the agenda with you real quickly so you have a sense of what's happening, and then looking forward to digging in deeper. First, we'll have a welcome from our board chair at A+ Schools, Dr. Sarah Silverman. I'll go through the report and some of the key challenges and opportunities that we think are facing our city at this critical juncture. We'll have some reflections from some of the folks that we were able to interview for our Rising Up stories this year, Yael Silk, Angela Mike, and Morgan Snyder. We appreciate their time in being interviewed, and also for the information that they provided us about arts programming, CTE programming, and student perspectives on learning during the pandemic. Finally, we'll have some remarks from Dr. Wayne Walters, the interim superintendent, and Nina Esposito-Visgitis, our president of the Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers. And I'll close this out and take questions and try and moderate questions for the audience. So really looking forward to it. Sarah, can I ask you to give us a brief welcome and introduction?
Absolutely. Thank you, James. It's my pleasure on behalf of the Board of Directors of A+ Schools to welcome everyone and thank you for attending. It looks like the numbers are ticking up, but we have dozens of folks on the call this morning, which is incredibly gratifying. I know that I see just sort of scrolling through a bit. We've got community leaders, parents, members of the school community in a variety of different ways, as well as a broader community. So thanks so much for making time this morning to jump on and hear a little bit more about this report. I feel incredibly proud, and James, I hope you and the rest of A+ feel incredibly proud of the report this year. I think that one of the things that folks noted last year that we were incredibly excited about is the opportunity to tell more stories about great successes in terms of what's happening across Pittsburgh Public Schools and across the community. And it was undoubtedly an incredibly difficult last couple of years or year and a half. But there are so many incredible stories of ways that students have gotten access to opportunities that they need to be successful, through the school system itself, through many other partners coming together to provide support, and in some ways, standing up and being even more of a community perhaps than we've ever been before. So we're really, really excited to share this report with you and tell some of those stories. In addition, in a lot of ways, to the kind of traditional ways that we've told stories over the course of the last decade and a half about how schools are doing. So really, really appreciate your being here to hear more about that. And I can't wait for James to tell you more. I think that if I can say one thing in terms of takeaways from observing what's happened as the communities come together, what's possible when it comes to collaboration really strikes me. I think that we've really only sort of scratched the surface, and that there are so many more ways that we can come together to better support kids and families. And hopefully the work that we at A+ have done over the course of the last year or so to really make sure that we're truly centering kids and families will help lead the way on that, and that today's conversation will make a bit of progress. So with that, I will turn it back over to James. James, thanks for the opportunity to welcome everybody, and thanks again for all of those of you who have joined us today.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks to the board of A+ Schools for all your support for our work and for what we've been able to do over the last year. So I'll provide a brief overview here about where we want to go. We want a Pittsburgh where every child succeeds. And our mission at A+ Schools is to make sure every child in Pittsburgh, but especially our Black and brown children, get the high quality education they deserve. You know, for too long, we've known that our systems are designed to fail Black and brown children and families, especially here in Pittsburgh. But we focused for too long on what doesn't work, and that doesn't work, right? With only 32% of our seniors from 2011, kids who were freshmen in 2011 graduating in 2021 from college or trade school in 6 years, we know we have work to do to support their success both prior to going to college and after. So what we've decided to do is at A+, rather than just telling you about the problems at our school, we've decided to focus on what is working, and especially what works for Black and brown children in our community. Because if we want to change systems, we have to work differently. It's why we launched what we're calling Project Plus Us. Over the last year and a half, we've been working on building a more efficient and effective learning ecosystem where every single child can win. We operate this project at the individual, school, community, and systems-wide levels to identify the barriers that are impacting learning, coordinating community-based resources and information to address those barriers, looking for bright spots, both nationally and locally, that point the way to better outcomes for all children, but especially Black and Brown children, create new solutions in collaboration with schools and community partners, and then share those successes from our neighborhoods and schools and reports like this report to the community, so our communities can inspire each other and learn from one another. Over the last year and a half, we've had the opportunity to work with a collaboration of partners called the Pittsburgh Learning Collaborative. We joined this collaborative in order to be able to advocate for better opportunities for our children and for partnership between our schools and our communities with what we called our budget book. We connected families directly to resources via the mail and through robocalls, over 15,000 homes, to learn more about tutoring resources, food, and other opportunities for kids that were in need of different resources during the pandemic. We launched what we're calling 412 Rhymes with the folks from Boom Concepts and Open Literacy to deliver early literacy lessons via text message as a way to try and provide additional learning support for families. And we created our family hotline with a group of partners to be able to address learning resource issues, and whether that be needing a coat for getting to school in the winter, or getting a computer if they weren't available, especially early in the pandemic. This family hotline has been our way of supporting learning. Sorry. But before I begin, and so we're hopeful that you'll join us in this effort as we are building a coalition and collaboration across the community. If your organization's interested, you can join the Pittsburgh Learning Collaborative. You can find out more at projectplusus.org. But I want to thank our sponsors and our funders before I get started, because honestly, this work wouldn't happen without them. There are many to list, so I don't want to offend anyone by not listing them. So I will just flash through these slides just to say thank you. Thank you so much for your generosity. Thank you for sharing your resources. In the book, there are a variety of ads this year. There are QR codes, phone numbers, websites. If you have a need, many of our partner organizations are ready to help, and you can find out more by scrolling through the pages of our report to the community and learning more about the resources that they have to provide. We can't say enough how much the collaboration among multiple organizations over the past year and a half has meant to us as an organization that has worked for many years on trying to improve educational outcomes for children. What we've learned is that working together, we can do more than we ever thought we could do alone. And so we're very grateful to all of the different partners who have supported our work and who helped sponsor the report to the community this year and helped underwrite it. Additionally, I want to thank our team at A+ Schools, Faith, Sean, Ryan, Geeta, Alec, and Sam, for all you did to make this book a possibility. There's many late hours, lots of edits and rewrites, great interviews that have all happened because of this amazing team. I also want to thank the folks at PPS, Dr. Walters, Dr. Dwyer, Deb Friss, Chanel Labash, Anthony Perillo, Ebony Pugh, and Susan Chersky for all of your support in helping us get the access to the data, for reviewing and making sure that what we said was accurate, and for your time. A special thanks to Deb Friss, who has announced her retirement and who has done so much work over the past 17 years with us as an organization to provide data. We will miss her greatly, and we appreciate all of the support she's given to this project in her time at the district. Wishing her best wishes as she goes on to her retirement. All right, so let's get to what's inside our 2021 report. Like the past couple of years, we highlight bright spots within the district that are showing how we can move forward, schools and communities that we can be learning from. Secondly, we provide an academic roadmap this year that highlights the milestones parents and caregivers should watch as their children progress through school. As always, we provide an independent analysis of the district and unpack where inequities exist and what we can do about them. And finally, we provide the latest information we have on individual schools. This year, obviously, because of the pandemic, we did not have the same kind of testing data that we usually provide, but we do have some great stories about what our arts education, the impact of arts education in our community, the impacts of career and technical education on our students, information about resources and selected community partners, and a special look, which I will discuss more, on how racial and economic segregation are impacting our schools and what can be done about it. Because what we know is the pandemic laid bare existing inequities, and that phrase, when I say it, I mean it. I want us to unpack what that means, right? Over the last 18 months, families have lost loved ones. Communities have had to shoulder the burden of educating their children and caring for loved ones. The inequities that we see throughout our community were only made worse by this pandemic. Access to food, where many families relied on PPS for food, and a huge shout out to the folks at PPS for addressing this as soon as possible to make sure that those that were relying on food from PPS were able to continue to get it. But others had enough, right, when this pandemic started. For those, some had technology at home, like high-speed internet and devices from their schools. Others did not. While some had at-home learning support where folks could pod up together with other families and pay for help to support learning, many more had to work and had no options or few options. So some had to leave children at home. Others were able to find learning hubs. Some had to work and risk getting COVID and hourly jobs and as essential workers, while others could work from home and collect a salary and watch their children as they did that. And finally, our students with disabilities who are already not doing well suffered the most, as we could not provide services for them and their families shouldered the burden. To all the parents and caregivers out there who shouldered the responsibilities of the last year with whatever supports you were able to find, we are truly grateful to you. And to the teachers who learned how to teach online and in a hybrid form, we're thankful for the efforts that you've made. But this isn't a story of hopelessness. I mean, as you'll see from our Rising Up stories, our community came together to address these issues. Like so many times before, our city has turned these challenges into opportunities. We found that the Lighthouse Project changed its programming to stay in touch with students so they could support them online and make sure that students had a caring adult or caring peer that they could talk to during the pandemic. Parents found the help of organizations like the Bible Center in the East End or Gwen's Girls that provided learning hubs and tutoring support for children of all ages. Big thank you to the County Department of Human Services, Trying Together, and the United Way for supporting those learning hubs and for helping to stand up those efforts. Community school coordinators like Lingair Njai made calls and did outreach to make sure families had food and the tech and learning supplies they needed in order to learn. It was far from sufficient to the needs, but it demonstrated that when we want to, we can work together across sectors to make sure our children and families are okay. And let's be clear, our city is at a critical juncture. This pandemic has harmed so many of our communities. And with the resignation of the prior superintendent, the burdens that families have had to bear on childcare and education, and the gaps in resources between schools and among students, the district and our city face some critical challenges. It's my contention today, and I'll walk through these challenges ahead, that unless PPS and our city fundamentally come together to redesign our systems to be able to meet the needs of students and families after the pandemic, we will undermine our community's ability to provide a quality public education to our children. We need to work together. This burden isn't on the district alone, and we know that if we can come together, put all hands on deck, we can do better by all of our students. So what can we do to improve the system? Well, here are 4 key challenges that I contend we need to address. There are others, right? But from our data and analysis, these are ones that after 17 years of doing this work at A+ schools and with myself close to a decade at this organization, these are some key issues that I see continually recurring and ones that we need to address. The first is segregation, which is concentrating poverty in certain schools. And I'll talk about what that ends up meaning for our children. The second is funding equity. Unfortunately, while we do give some of our students in high poverty schools more, there are many schools where we give less that need more in general. Third is access to opportunities. The economic advantages that children are born into in this city become educational advantages in our current system. And finally, school attendance. We know that chronic absence is a function of school communities, school and community partnerships. How do families and students feel known and welcomed in schools? And how do we work together to change that? And thankfully, there are bright spots within our own school system that point the way. But let's be clear, the declining enrollments that we see at PPS are a critical challenge. Since 2016, district has lost nearly 3,000 students. That's the equivalent of about 11 elementary schools under our current configurations and enrollment sizes. That challenge is one that I believe we can meet, but it requires us to think deeply about how we redesign the system and how folks are engaged in that process, right? Because after 17 years, we know what works at a school level. Focusing on the data for us has borne some good fruit. We've looked at who's getting way better than average outcomes with students, especially Black and brown students. And some things have come into relief for us over the past couple of years. One, great schools build systems that center students, right? Their focus is constantly on who their students are and what they need. They put their data to work, right? So they understand their students on the basis not only of tests, but other information to try and understand what they can do to support children. And then they work collaboratively because we know the burdens of raising children aren't all on our schools, and that our community has a role to play in raising children. So the great schools are working both internally in a collaborative way so that teachers have a voice and are able to drive what needs to happen, but also externally by partnering with community partners to ensure that students have what they need, the kinds of opportunities and supports that can really create a thriving educational ecosystem. We also know the key milestones for students. Years of research by folks across the nation kind of have told us what the key milestones are from birth through graduation. Families have to be partners in learning, and we encourage the district. We're encouraged by the district's effort to make parents partners. The PEP program, which is providing workshops on a regular basis to families that it's driven by parents, is one good start. We would encourage the district to provide more data to families and to help families understand that data on an ongoing basis so that they can help know if their child's on track or not. We're also providing resources for families so that you know what you can do to engage, whether it's starting to save for college or trade school for your child, or making sure that you're minding the roadblocks that get in the way of school success. But at a systems level, we've got to address some significant challenges. And the first one is segregation. We can design a system that's more racially and economically integrated. The map you see behind the title here is an important, provides an important historical picture and snapshot of what our schools are facing. This is the 1930s Homeowners Loan Corporation map, and it's led to historic underinvestment and valuation of Black held properties and neighborhoods in our city to this day. The design challenge that the district faces is that many families rightfully want to send their children to schools closer in proximity to where they live, but we have neighborhoods that are highly segregated and concentrate poverty. If we concentrate poverty in neighborhoods and repeat that pattern in our schools, we know we're going to have significant issues for our students and teachers. But children, families, they will move to schools where there are perceived better opportunities. And so we've got to figure out how to provide those better opportunities closer to home for all schools. Right now, recent research out of Stanford has looked at data from thousands of districts across the country and how segregation has impacted learning. One of the main conclusions is that segregation matters because it concentrates Black and brown students in high poverty schools, not because of the racial composition of their schools. Let me say this again. It is the concentration of poverty in certain schools that leads to academic disparities. And in Pittsburgh, the graph that I show above, we have schools where poverty is concentrated 90 to 100%. Those schools are almost all entirely Black. This design leads to greater leadership and teacher turnover, greater numbers of students that start behind as access to high quality early learning in high poverty neighborhoods is limited. and greater number of students with disabilities as environmental factors that impact cognitive development, like exposure to lead, are more likely to be present in our highest poverty neighborhoods. Additionally, another dimension of this challenge around addressing segregation is that a high percentage of our students overall attending PPS are in poverty, with 64% of our students considered economically disadvantaged. As you can see from this graph, there is some variability in how schools with high concentration of poverty do by students academically, but the overall trend is that as poverty increases, academic outcomes decrease. We need to learn from that. At the same time, need to redesign not just feeder patterns, but offerings so we can have schools that are integrated by design. We're not going to design choice out of this system, but we can leverage it as a power for good to integrate by design. If we don't, we'll continue to see huge gaps in opportunities and outcomes for students based on current segregation patterns. As the Stanford study noted, if it were possible to create equal educational opportunity under conditions of segregation and economic inequality, some community among the thousands of districts in this country would have done so. None have. Separate is still unequal. And so that is the design challenge facing our school board and facing our district right now, is to understand how we are currently concentrating poverty in certain schools and what we can do to undo that. And that's going to take a community-wide conversation between our schools, our community members, and our community leadership. The second challenge is funding equity. We can design a system that funds schools based on student needs, but right now, per pupil spending in Pittsburgh does not account for student needs sufficiently. This graph, the scatter plot graph that you see here, shows how much is spent on a per pupil basis, each dot representing a school, by the concentration of poverty in the school. And while we do see schools in this upper right-hand quadrant that are high need and getting more funding, there are a number of schools with just as much need getting much less funding, and schools with much less need getting more funding. Right. So if we want to have schools that are equitable, then we need to fund equitably, looking at student need. One example, and I point this out because we're working deeply with the teachers and students and staff at Perry High School. One example of the funding inequities that we see is that in 2019, Perry High School was the lowest funded on a per pupil basis school in the city of Pittsburgh, in Pittsburgh Public Schools. The district average was $21,190. Had Perry received that amount, they would have received $883,407 more. That's 8 teachers or counselors, additional social workers, additional programming, resources that could have helped. Even more galling is the fact that our selective magnet high schools received much more per pupil than Perry in 2019. And you can see from the chart in the lower right-hand corner that our neighborhood schools have higher concentrations of students that are economically disadvantaged, higher concentrations of students with disabilities and IEPs, and average per pupil spending that's lower. We've got to do better, and we can, right? It doesn't mean, though, that this is a zero-sum game. It just means that we've got to think about the design of how we fund schools so that we can get to meeting student needs. The third challenge is access to opportunity. We can design a system that provides opportunities to engage all students and help them succeed. Right now, though, access to arts education varies. It's not definitely correlated to economic disadvantage, but some schools have lots of access to arts, others don't. But we know the importance of arts education from our friends at the Arts Education Collaborative, and you'll hear more from Yael Silk here shortly, because it provides opportunities for students to connect learning across different subject matters. It provides opportunities for students to learn background knowledge, which helps create context for what they're reading in school and to provide connections for them to that reading. So we know it's important. We've got to be able to provide that kind of opportunity to all children. The other opportunity that is highly correlated with economic status is gifted education. As I said, those economic advantages that students are born into early in life become educational opportunities, advantages. And we can design a system that provides all students with ways to demonstrate their gifts and talents. There's a great article online, it will be online later today, where Dr. Lucy Ware, who was at Dilworth for years and is now doing a project with the Center for Urban Education, talks about how Dilworth brought gifted education and the project-based learning supports of it to Dilworth on a school-wide basis. worth the read because it shows how we can change our systems to design them and provide the kinds of supports that the Gifted and Talented program within PPS does provide. But let's be clear, the current criteria for addressing and putting kids in Gifted and Talented come from the state. So there's state policy we would have to change in order to provide students who are advanced with additional opportunities for growth. But that's doable, and we've seen it in our students, because if we don't, we're going to continue to see huge disparities between those who are identified gifted and not. Right now, white students are 6.4 times more likely to be identified as gifted than Black students as a result of the ways in which poverty impacts gifted identification, which then leads to racial disparities in who takes AP courses and earns college credit, right? These courses we know are a good predictor of post-secondary success. And so if we want students to get to and through college and trade school, we know we have to increase the numbers. I will say on the positive, we see some growth in all student groups in the past year, even during the pandemic, of those taking AP courses. That's a testament to schools. And the other bright spot that I wanted to point out, and I think this has a lot to do, though we have to dig more into it, is that there is the Equity and Justice Scholars Program out of the University of Pittsburgh that's been working deeply with Westinghouse. And what we saw was nearly 70% of the Westinghouse students that took an AP course last year took the exam. That's not the case across the district. And so we want to dig in deeper and understand how students are being supported to both take the exam and learn more. Because if we don't dig in, we know what happens in terms of who graduates from college or trade school within 6 years. If you look at the trajectory of ninth graders who started in 2011, we had 1,742 students start high school in 2011. 1,227 of them graduated in 2015. Only 393 completed college or trade school in 2021, which leaves 1,300 students who started our schools in 2011 where we're unsure of the outcome. Some of them may have gone on to graduate in 5 or 6 years. Some may have gotten their graduation equivalency degree and then maybe found their way into a trade or apprenticeship program that's not covered by the National Student Clearinghouse where we get our data. But this is a huge question for the economic development of this region. And it's the kind of question we need to answer if we want to make sure that every single child that is here, their talents are being put to use to drive the growth and the vibrancy of our communities. And where did those that did finish high school, college, or trade school in 6 years in 2021 go? Well, they went to this selection of schools, right? And so we know we have schools that are serving students with higher levels of poverty. They're getting more of them to and through college. We got to dig in deeper and understand how that happens. This isn't all on the high schools, though. The preparation isn't all of the story, right? We also need to start helping students understand which colleges and universities are better at supporting them to and through, both with advising, scholarships, and other types of resources so that they can get through, and making sure students know those options. There's great work being done out of the University of Chicago and other universities to look at just that, so that we can help our students pick the right programs for them so they don't end up just doing a couple years of school, not finishing, and ending up in a whole world of debt. We can do better by providing students and families better information up front. Finally, the fourth challenge is attendance, right? And this is the one that I saved for last because it's one that we're facing right now. Some of you may have seen the Pittsburgh Independent Nonprofit Journalism report yesterday that talked about school attendance and chronic absence. We can design a system where families are partners in education and children are known. There's been great work out of attendance work, everyday labs, and others to really address what chronic absence, how to reduce chronic absence. Because we know if students aren't attending, they aren't learning. I want to thank the Institute of Education Sciences at Mathematica for permission to reprint this graph. But what we saw last year was a 1% growth in chronic absence during the pandemic, with big jumps in elementary school, which makes sense, right? When we think about students who were participating online, we saw a reduction of those in high school that were typically chronically absent because they were able to get online and participate that way, but probably greater problems with our younger children getting online. Chronically absent students missed over 10 days or more on average there was a clear relationship between those absences and course failures. And you can see from the graph below that the average days absent by number of courses failed, the more you missed, the more courses students failed in the first semester of 2021. You know, we can fix this though, right? Again, one of the ways we can fix this is by choosing not to concentrate poverty in schools, because the more we concentrate poverty in schools, the more likely students are to be chronically absent. The other way we can fix it is by looking at the bright spots, right? Arsenal K-5, Arsenal 6-8, Manchester 6-8, and Schiller are all schools with higher levels of economic disadvantage that have seen huge reductions in chronic absence compared to their peers that have the same amount of concentrations of poverty. What are they doing? Well, we've highlighted Schiller in the past in our 2019 report to the community. You can go back and read it. And there've been other stories about what they've done. But we should be looking at Arsenal K-5, 6-8 in Manchester to understand the context there, right? Different contexts mean there are different solutions for how students are being engaged and brought in, and how families are being made partners in school attendance. There are opportunities for improvement here, and I point them out, and hopefully we leave you hopeful, not hopeless in this presentation, because schools worthy of our children are schools that intentionally address these challenges. Instead, for segregation, we can learn from schools that are diverse by design, like City High and some of our magnet schools. These schools that are intentionally diverse and reduce concentrations of poverty. We can fund based on student need. We can look at how we're currently funding and change that model so that where there are schools with greater needs, the students that have them get more resources. We can design schools that are opportunity rich, right? And rethink the physical spaces and enrollment criteria to create schools where it's possible to give kids access to a variety of learning opportunities. And finally, around school attendance, we can make families partners and create school cultures where parents are partners and every child is known. In addition, there are other opportunities of how we can help improve our schools that I would encourage the district to take a look at, right? Initiatives that are already underway to diversify the teacher pipeline, like through the Brashear Teaching Magnet and the Parent to Teacher program, to build strong community partnerships as have been done at a variety of schools, and as you can see in the selected community partners that we list. We can invest in school leadership and operational excellence to ensure that our schools are run well and teachers and parents have a voice that's heard and adjustments are made as a result. And finally, we can leverage the great research institutions that we have here in Pittsburgh. And we have some of the best research institutions in the country in our backyard. And some of them, like the Learning Research and Design Center out of the University of Pittsburgh, are working with other districts like Dallas to help them improve. We can leverage those resources and bring them to bear here. And there are some programs, like I mentioned, the Equity and Justice Scholars Program out of Pitt that are doing that, right? But how do we do this in a more systemic way? There are areas for growth and we can get there because we know we already have schools that show us how to design for a better system, right? These are the schools with enrollment growth and loss from the last 4 years. And we see Schiller, SciTech, Carmel, and Montessori having growth while other schools have seen enrollment declines. What have they done? What do parents like about those schools? How do we dig deeper to understand what those schools are doing so we can see significant enrollment growth? We have programs that help engage students. Ms. Mike is going to speak here shortly about how CTE is graduating students at a much higher rate than their PPS peers, with 93% of students who participated in CTE in 2020 graduating in 4 years. And we have school models that are getting results. You know, these are from our past reports, but we know Arsenal 6-8 has continued to exceed the growth standards in the state year after year. City High has gotten students, low-income students, to be able to graduate in 6 years and graduate on time at higher rates than our district averages. And schools can eliminate chronic absence. Schiller Middle School, as I've already mentioned, has done that. And they're continuing to work on it, even as this year presents some significant challenges for folks. You know, we use this as a mantra here, and I know folks at PPS have talked about this as well, but every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. We can redesign this system because we know what works to create schools where students win. Let's choose what works. And I really am appreciative of all of my staff, Amy Matson too, and Graham and Tiffany, who are monitoring things as well. I want to give them a shout out as well, because we know what works to create schools where students win. And we're trying to do that here. We're doing that here at A+ Schools. So with that, I want to open up to some reflections on what you just heard from some of our community partners. And thank you very much for your attention in listening to this presentation. Yael, I'll start with you.
Thank you, James. I want to invite all of you to take a long, slow breath with me. As you imagine yourself a 10-year-old PPS student ready to go to school. And as you step onto your bus, you immediately know this morning will be special. Because while the outside dons the traditional school bus yellow, the interior is rainbow colored, and at the front sits an artist patiently waiting for all the students to come on board before sharing stories of their cultural heritage and famous folk tales from West Africa, Ireland, Russia, and around the world. This is not a fairy tale. This is the true story of an arts partnership in the 90s, started by two East Hills elementary school teachers in collaboration with the Heartwood Bus and the Grable Foundation. It is fondly remembered by Arts Education Collaborative Advisory Committee member, Abby Farkas, as an early and impactful arts learning experience at PPS. The arts are powerful, personal, communal, and universal. As we continue to navigate the challenges of a global pandemic, systemic racism, and a public education system that does not yet offer all of our children what they need and deserve, engaging in powerful, personally relevant arts learning can help students make sense of what is happening to them, make choices they can feel good about, and dare I say, experience a sustaining joy. Arts education offers students opportunities to engage with mirrors and windows along their learning journey, just as East Hills Elementary School students did along their bus route. Mirrors, when students self-actualize, thanks to seeing themselves reflected in the art, artists, and arts educators they encounter, as practiced by Aya Salita Hickman, Equity Advisory Panel member, artist, entrepreneur, and teaching artist. Windows, when arts instruction introduces students to people, places, and cultures that differ from their own, building models of solidarity, community, resistance, and peace on behalf of this powerful generation of young people. Tending to these mirrors and windows is exemplified beautifully in Sister Aisha Thomas's distinct equity practice as leader of the Promise of Sisterhood program that is active in 4 PPS schools, and her work as the director and teaching artist of PPS's culturally responsive arts education program until it formally ended in 2013. I am thrilled that the arts are featured in this year's report to the community at a time when both students and educators need the arts more than ever. Available arts education data for PPS shows that there are investments in the arts, including many bright spots, such as the commitment to arts partnerships fostered at Beechwood Pre-K 5 that you can read more about in the report. However, it is also evident that arts learning is not equitable and that there is a great deal more to do. Today, though, I am hopeful. In 2021, the federal government dedicated a historic amount of funding for public education that explicitly can be spent on the arts. And if that wasn't enough, a former music teacher stepped into the interim superintendent role. This is a hopeful sequence of events indeed. The entire Arts Education Collaborative team looks forward to working with PPS leaders and partners to make good on the promise of a well-rounded education outlined in the Every Student Succeeds Act. Thank you to the A+ Schools staff for this opportunity to share with all of you and for their commitment to integrated learning that features the arts.
Thanks so much, Yael. And thank you for your work and the data that you provided us. Couldn't have done it without you. So really appreciate your support. Ms. Mike, please join us and let's tell us more about career and technical education in the district and where it's going and where it's been.
Good morning, everyone. In career and technical education, I'd like to do some reflections on some challenges that we had during the pandemic, but also how we turned that into opportunity for us to do better for our students. So while we were in 100% remote learning and then hybrid learning for our students, it was a challenge because our students in career and technical education are used to working hands-on with industry-specific equipment in their labs. But to keep students engaged, again, we turned lemons to lemonade. Our team got together and we delivered remote learning kits to all of our CTE students. So 500 kits went out based on their program, and we delivered those to homes and were able at a distance to say hello and have some type of communication with our students, which was really appreciated by students and parents. That helped to keep them engaged to an extent. But I do want to point out that it could never replace working in a lab on a lathe machine or a laser engraver or 3D printer or lifting up a car or changing tires or replacing brakes. But what it did give us was a chance to really look at the theoretical aspects of our CTE programs, and we were able to purchase some supplemental online supports for the theory part. And we really learned from that because that helps students to prepare for safety certifications and also their theory part of their test that they would take on certifications. But it also helped us see that we knew there was going to be learning loss during this pandemic on the practical hands-on side. So now that we're back in the labs and we're in our new normal, we're continuing to use the online curriculum supports. We didn't let those go because they were very helpful and we're using our technology. But we are really focusing on accelerating learning in the hands-on practical aspects of our program. And how we're doing that is we're working even closer with our industry and business partners who are really supporting us. And by way of project-based learning through internships, pre-apprenticeship programs, we are helping our students get out into industry and really get experience now that we're back in school full-time. It allows students to complete their competencies for their programs. They can earn stackable industry certifications. Also, they're taking dual enrollment credits, and they're really being prepared for post-secondary schooling and or a job. So it's not just one, it's either and or. And for us in CTE, we really realize that accelerating learning is really based on the principle that it's not something that a learner absorbs, but it's something a learner creates. And that's really what sinks in for our students and makes the difference. So our approach to learning, and we knew this before the pandemic, but we really are focusing on it now. It's really activity-based rather than presentation-based. And the activities really submerge the learner into learning and accelerates learning to make up for that learning loss since we've been in the midst of the pandemic. An example of this, I just want to give you one really positive example. There's many of them, but I'll give you one. Our carpentry program. We have partnered with the Carpenters Union and we are building tiny houses at Carrick High School and Westinghouse High School, our carpentry students. That partnership is really helping our students accelerate learning. While they're building the house, they are learning not only the theory, but also the practical aspects of being a carpenter. And it really is accelerating their learning. And at the end of this, they're going to have a tangible product to see that they built right in their local neighborhoods. So to wrap up, I just want to mention a quote, and it's one that I'm sure everyone knows. It says, "In the midst of chaos, there's also opportunity." So we've learned from our challenges in the midst of this pandemic, and we continue to look at this as an opportunity, not a challenge, to continue to improve systems and processes for our students in CTE and their success. So thank you, James.
Thank you, Ms. Mike. Thanks, Angie. Really appreciate you and your leadership around career and technical education and the work that's being done to expand hands-on learning opportunities and connections to industry here locally. It's a key set of work. And for folks that are interested, you can always go to the CTE website on the district site and learn more about the opportunities that exist for you. Finally, I would love to welcome Morgan Snyder, who's a student leader, Kappa senior, but also was on the Superintendent's Advisory Board, served with me on the ESSER Funding Advisory Committee, and just all around thoughtful student leader who was willing to share her experiences with us in our Rising Up section this year. Morgan, thank you for joining us from school, and thank Ms. Perlman for allowing you to have the opportunity to come join us, missing a little bit of class today. We appreciate you joining us and sharing your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the kind words. This past experience with the pandemic was definitely one that will shape my learning forever. We missed a lot. But honestly, our teachers and our staff helped us get through it. In the beginning, when the district leaders and teachers were struggling to adapt to virtual and hybrid learning, us as students were lost. And as student leaders, we had to find a way to move forward. And in my work on the Superintendent Student Advisory Council, we really did find this as an opportunity to progress more than we ever have. On the mental health subcommittee that I serve on, it became very apparent during the pandemic how fractured our students' mental health is. And we know that we need those supports. So as student leaders, we were able to put things together, and we're continuing to keep those things in place this year. And as a member on the ESSER Council, we were able to advocate for that. Myself as a student leader, and Tyreek, a very good friend of mine. We know how important that is. And it's so exciting that us as students have a voice in the space. Throughout the entire pandemic, we struggled to find that voice and to find where we fit in all of it. But the district and our student voice project manager, Ms. Mason, helped us navigate. And we were able to make more progress than we ever have. The relationships that we normally have as a council were really hard to build in the online environment. But through little breakout rooms and our continuous subcommittee meetings and the work, we were able to make those connections, even connections we weren't able to have with our friends. There is just so much that goes into all of our leadership, and everybody, district staff, our project manager, my fellow student leaders helped us hone in and navigate. So I'm really grateful to everybody. And I know that we can come out on the other side as stronger leaders than we ever were before.
Thank you so much, Morgan, and thank you for your leadership and your advocacy for student mental health. We know that many of our students are still suffering and need supports. And because of you and your advocacy, we know that there will be supports on the way. So thank you for that. I'd now like to turn it over to our interim superintendent, Dr. Wayne Walters, for his remarks and reflections on this year's report to the community. And thank you, Dr. Walters, for joining us today for this announcement of our 2021 report to the community.
Thank you so much. And thank you again, Morgan, for sharing your voice and elevating your voice as a student, because that's a value. And also thank you, Angela Mike, for your stellar leadership with our CTE programming. And again, Mr. Fogarty, I just want to thank you and A+ Schools for its continued commitment to providing this valuable resource to the community in a way that is easily digestible and encourages the involvement of stakeholders to ensure all students receive the educational and equitable experience they deserve. And I intentionally use the term experience because, as evidenced in this year's Rising Up stories, high quality teaching and learning environments go beyond the core instruction to providing students opportunities to engage in their learning in offerings such as our career and technical education programs, or partnerships such as the one highlighted today with the Center for the Arts that brings local artists into our classrooms and do really transformative things. The report also demonstrates the power within our community to remove barriers that hinder students from participating fully in the learning, such as hunger, dental care, and the services coordinated by staff like Langier Njai within our community schools. In the absence of state testing results due to the pandemic, this year's report zeroes in on a critical piece to student achievement: chronic absenteeism. All of our efforts to improve teaching and learning rely on students making it to school every day. Recent data received by our board of directors emphasized the need to pay attention to chronic absenteeism and the number of days students are not in school, as each day is critical for optimal learning. As I continue to learn so much about the state of our district, as we live and work in challenging environments created during the pandemic, I have shared with our staff the need to re-energize ourselves and unapologetically focus on teaching and learning in order to reach our desired outcomes for students. Challenges such as chronic absenteeism, as shared in this report, will require deep collaboration with all stakeholders, which is why we appreciate the efforts of A+ Schools to go beyond the data, to provide information to families and stakeholders on what we can do collaboratively to help our students and the schools succeed. So again, A+ Schools and Mr. Fogarty, thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Walters, for your leadership in this critical juncture. We really appreciate you stepping up and stepping forward to take the reins at this time. Now is my great pleasure to introduce Nina Esposito-Visgitis, the president of the Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers, for her reflections. And again, thank you for being here, Nina. Appreciate you. Double check. Graham, can you help make sure she's unmuted? There you go. All right.
Thank you so much. I am so excited and encouraged by so much of what I've heard today, not only but by what has been done, but what can be done and what must be done. If the proper supports and partnerships are provided, as James said, we do have the tools, we have to use them. And I want to thank you, James, and the A+ for inviting me today. I always look forward to this event and to your insightful data that we can and should use to make our schools more inviting, more effective, and more welcoming to our students, our families, and our educators. It's always a perfect reminder to what this pandemic has certainly shown us repeatedly and definitely somewhat ruthlessly, that we need each other in order to educate our students effectively. None of us can do it alone. Teachers have never worked harder, and I know parents have never worked harder. We've all had to pivot and rethink education and how it can be delivered more effectively to help our students each and every day. And partnerships have never, ever, ever been more important, and supports also. And they've never been more important to our students also. And you've heard it repeatedly from Morgan, from parents in this wonderful report, from educators in the report. We've heard it repeatedly. And I must say, in my travels across the state with AFT Pennsylvania and AFT, you see it in the success in many successful districts. Partnerships are what work. And I loved hearing about effective partnerships. I see it in our CTE program that I've had the great honor to work with so closely. It's the partnerships that make these programs work so beautifully. And in Yael's program in the arts, it's the partnerships that work for our students. And I'm so excited to hear about. And I think we have to maintain, to celebrate, and expand and talk about. When we talk about community schools, which I'm so excited as I see it expand in our schools and it brings the community in, those are the kind of things when we're all working together to talk about. I was so excited to hear Sarah talking about the models of excellence in our schools. That's what we have to use and to replicate, to provide the support and replicate them in other schools. Let's continue this conversation, please, to take those models of excellence and replicate them, to provide the support and replicate them in other schools so other schools can to use them and to reap the benefits of them too. That's what makes me excited, because I know we can have this excellence in each and every one of our schools so all of our students can benefit. Thank you so much, James.
Thank you, Nina, for being here. Really appreciate you and appreciate your leadership of our teachers in this, what has been a very challenging year and a half for our students and for our schools. With that, I want to just give you a couple more points, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions and answers. For those that are able to stay on the line to potentially answer questions from the press, we'd appreciate that if you can. If not, we understand, and we will try and make sure that we connect folks appropriately. But what can you do next as a community? Well, one, you can take a read of our report to the community. You can get more information at ourschoolspittsburgh.org. You can schedule a presentation to share this information with your community. If you want us to tailor it to a neighborhood, to your church group, to your community organization, we can do that. Feel free to reach out, contact us at info@aplusschools.org to schedule a presentation. If you want to get your older student involved, 8th grade through 12th grade, in being an advocate, much like Morgan is, our Team Block program is here to support student leaders to understand this data, to use it, and to create conversations within their own school community and across the city about how we can make changes that will improve student outcomes and student engagement in learning. And finally, join us as we advocate for change. We know that over the next few months, with a deficit facing our school system and with a need for really creatively thinking about how we redesign our system in the face of enrollment decline, that we're going to have to advocate for change. And it's going to take all voices at the table to come up with a set of plans, not just one, but many plans and strategies to change for the better. And so we encourage you to join us as we advocate for that change. We will, if you want, you can sign up to get our ongoing newsletter, which will provide you with when those opportunities are to speak to the school board, to speak to our legislators, to speak both at the state and federal level. But we know we've got everything we need to succeed by our children here in Pittsburgh. It's about being about that work and knowing that those conversations may not be easy, but when we make the choice for our children, that we can win. Finally, I just want to say thank you again to everyone who participated in today's conference, for those who helped us learn more through the Rising Up interviews, and for all of our friends and partners who supported our efforts, whether that be financially or throughout the pandemic, in terms of delivering supports to kids and families. If you, as a resident, as a family member, educator, have questions, feel free to use our family hotline. We have both English and Spanish, and then we have the ability to translate in 12 other languages. So feel free to give us a call. The line is always open. We'll return your call within 24 to 48 hours. If you haven't already if this is something that the parent hotline at the district can't offer, or 211, this is the space we want to be in, where we can try and help you navigate the system and give you our best advice about what to do to help your child. But I just can't say thank you enough for everyone who joined us today, and appreciate you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy White on my team, who is going to help facilitate the question and answers, and I hope folks are able to stick around for that as well. Amy?
Yeah, thanks, James. There was actually only one main question in the chat so far, and there was some comments around tracking and reporting out and encouraging students to be involved in trade schools. So Angela, Mike, I did share the link to the CTE program, and so families can know how to get their students involved in that. But the question was around how students, the comment was, students are also segregated by disability, with Black and Brown students being disproportionately affected. What is the district doing to promote inclusion, was the question.
I will defer to Dr. Walters if he's able to answer, if he's still with us.
Yes, as a district, we've always been committed to inclusion. We're working on our processes to probably get it right, because of course we know that there's always spaces for improvement, but certainly inclusion has always been a value of our district. And of course, as we move our equity work forward from our on-track to equity plan and also working with our partnerships with the LTF, we hope that we can get this right with inclusionary practices.
Thanks, Dr. Walters.
And we just got another question in the chat. It's a three-parter. So the first part of the question is, what are the key collaborations the district needs? What might an entity like the city specifically do to help the district/students? Is the first part of the question.
Sure, I can posit some, I have some thoughts there, but if there are others that want to, whether that be Ms. Mike or Ms. Esposito-Visgitis or Dr. Walters, feel free to hop in. I mean, one of the key things that I, see is, part of what we learned through the pandemic was just information sharing, or the fact that, we know that our city and our schools are governed separately. They're separate entities, but there are so many ways in which they intersect, whether that be around issues of community development, issues of environmental health, issues of transportation. So when thinking about school data and understanding what types of disabilities we're seeing in our schools, we could be looking at how those maps that talk about lead exposure in our schools are showing up in the sort of the cognitive or developmental issues that we're seeing with students from those neighborhoods, and what can be done there and how we can try and create greater support. The other thing we could be doing is just making sure we know, because the busing system now is 3-tiering, and we have very small windows for getting kids to school, having better information sharing around where construction is happening, so that our transportation department can reroute buses so that they can be on time, would be helpful, right? And there are a variety of other areas where I can imagine greater coordination between the city and our schools would lead to greater outcomes and reduced friction, and better allocation of resources as a result. If others have thoughts, please feel free to share them.
I would just add to that I think our first key collaboration that we always would want is anything that's focused on advancing teaching and learning. Anything to support teachers with getting new skills from what we've learned during this pandemic, and anything that advances student outcomes in a way that is equitable and really supports this. Other things, of course, we would need assistance with is just, the social emotional dynamic that is taking place from this pandemic, and any supports for supporting our students and families in those ways. And so partnerships are always welcome once they're aligned to our mission and vision and our core work of the district. And so we welcome those partnerships and key collaborations, and hope for the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walters.
Yeah, thank you both. The next part of the question is, how has the pandemic impacted what you as a nonprofit have focused on in the past 2 years?
I mean, I think like so many are, and I said this to our staff at the beginning of the pandemic, when March 13th happened, we showed up March 16th, and I said, forget all of the plans that we had. Our first priority is making sure families have what they need so that learning can continue. And if learning is not going to continue, at least make sure that there's food, there are hygienic supplies, because stores were closed. And we've just taken that kind of can-do attitude, and our partners joined with us in that to make sure that, we were able to expand upon what was being provided, and to support and fill in gaps where we can. I think the other thing that it did is it made me as a leader, and I think our whole team realize, is we've got to work differently as nonprofits in support of our children. We've got to be much more focused on how the data that we look at, that we're able to impact it and know that we're able to impact it, right? So just to what Dr. Walter said, are we providing supports that are impacting teaching and learning and helping students succeed? And if we're not, what are we going to do to change to make that happen? And then we realized that we can't do it alone, that it's going to take time for collaboration, for building trust, for hearing people, both parents, teachers, students, our fellow nonprofits, about what their concerns are, and what we can do to make them better. So that's how we pivoted. And we think it's the right direction for our organization. And we will continue to stay focused on delivering for children and families what they need to be able to learn, and working with as many partners as possible, especially and including our school system, to be able to do that.
Thanks, James. And then the last part of this person's question, I'll just combine and asking, if the schools become less segregated, does the funding equity issue become less important over time? And what does a more integrated school district look like?
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges that we're facing is our neighborhoods are exceptionally segregated. Our neighborhoods, economic opportunity, I mean, just look at the Gender Equity Commission report from 2 years ago that clearly shows how inequitable our communities are in terms of their outcome. Well, if our school system just reflects that, then that's a serious challenge. So in thinking about the students that we currently educate, and thinking about enrollment decline, and thinking about how we could reconfigure this district so it delivers on the promise of a high quality education for all students, I think the key thing that I'm thinking about is, there are these two strategies. One, diversity by design, really making sure that we are inclusive of all families and finding out what they want in their schools, right? That chart that showed growth in certain schools, we should be learning from those families what it is that kept them in the district, and what it is about the schools where even where we're not seeing good academic growth, but families are still sending their children to those schools. What is it about those schools that the families like? And then I think we have to think about how do we design in a way so that we are capturing families and students kind of from broader geographic and economic areas. It means making sure that families have things that they want to opt into, schools they want to opt into. This is not a question for A+ schools to answer. This is a question for our entire community to answer, and one that will require, I think, some big thinking around how we design our schools, what kind of opportunities we provide, and whether we can align the types of schools we have to the desires of families to send them to them. These are all hard questions. I mean, I raise this as a challenge because it's a huge challenge for our district, especially in the face of enrollment declines and increasing poverty among the students that do come to Pittsburgh Public Schools. So I think there's a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm hopeful because there are models that show us how to do it, right? Models both within the district and within our charter sector that show what can be done when we design with intent to increase diversity.
James, do you want to do just one more? And then other questions in the chat I can keep working to answer or connect with those individuals then too.
Sure.
Okay. The students, parents, teachers are all dealing with trauma from the pandemic. What resources are available from the district and community partners to provide the necessary support?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will give you a couple ones that we know. We have some mental health resources. The folks at Presley Ridge, if you're a Northside resident, there's free mental health care and supports at their Northside Center, where you can go either as a family collectively, as a student, a teacher, or a community member that need help to get counseling and other referral supports. There are programs like Miss Cecilia Ware's program out of Morrow that is working intentionally around restorative practices as a tool to address trauma. And then there are a variety of mental health supports that the district is looking at, including its own counselors and social workers. But Dr. Walters, if you had additional thoughts on what is being provided at the district right now and what's being planned for, feel free to respond.
Yeah, so certainly we're doing more aggressive planning because certainly we realize that this pandemic has created some dynamics around trauma that perhaps we did not expect upon returning to in-person learning. Of course, as it relates to our employees, we do have our employee assistance program. We do have some other resources that are technology-based around supporting social emotional learning that we're working to get up to speed. We do have our restorative practices, as you mentioned, our positive behavior intervention and supports models. And also we know that schools are doing innovative things based on their population and what they see and how they can address it. But one of the challenges that we have with trauma, and our counselors and social workers, obviously, and some partnerships that we have to try to support our students. But what I've seen at this point is just the magnitude and the need, where we do need some more community support and assistance, because it's a lot larger than we anticipated. And so in some spaces, we even may be struggling to support all of our students and families with the trauma that they're experiencing at this time.
Thanks, Dr. Walters. I mean, I think for organizations that, you know, I know like the Center for Victims, Presley Ridge I've mentioned, and there are others in this community, Mercy, that are able to provide behavioral health supports. Like, we need you all. It's our schools are in need, our children are in need, especially in our high schools. And so to the extent that we can come together and provide these mental health, you know, supports and figure out where they're most needed, it's something that needs to be done. And you know, we would look forward to, you know, supporting that kind of collaboration, facilitating and being as helpful as we can in that for our families and children. I just want to say thank you for your time and attention. You know, I want to make sure that we are mindful. This has been a good hour together, and I can't say thank you enough. There's lots of work to be done, so let's get to it. And I'll let you all back to the work that you do by saying thank you, and look forward to speaking with you in the future as a community. And we hope that we're able to be helpful as we move towards solving the problems and challenges that are facing our district. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good